Hello and welcome. We're thrilled that so many people are joining us today for this very important arts and culture and elder action event, Words to Win by Anat Shenker-Osorio. We're thrilled, Anat, that you're joining us. Some of you may be very familiar with Ashby Village, some may not. We are a member organization in the East Bay composed of a flourishing and bold network of people who support each other to age where they call home with vibrancy, self-determination, and purpose-filled lives. We have about 400 members, 300 volunteers of all ages, and a dedicated community of partners and supporters. If you haven't already, I invite you to join us as a member, as a volunteer, or both. Many are. It's an inspiring, caring, courageous community reshaping how we age. We're happy to present these kinds of programs and this quality of programming free of charge so it's accessible to everyone. If you're able to support our ability to offer free programming, we invite you to donate to Ashby Village. You will get a link in a follow-up email. So before I turn it over, I'd like to introduce Rochelle Lefkowitz, who will introduce Anat. And I first want to briefly thank Rochelle for her deep contributions to public activism and to Ashby Village. For 6 years, Rochelle was a board member of Ashby Village. She's now one of our sustaining advisors. Professionally, Rochelle founded ProMedia, a social justice communications firm, which gained national media attention for successful public education campaigns, policy books, speakers that all got headlines and changed many laws and lives. Together with our late and beloved board member, Marcia Friedman, Rochelle co-founded and today chairs Ashby Village's two dynamic interest groups, our Arts and Culture and Elder Action, in which today every one of our four Ashby Village members participates in Elder Action, from their involvement in climate action to police reform. All right, Rochelle, I'm turning it over to you to introduce Anat.
Most of us are here today eager for some new reasons for hope. Many of us have spent months writing postcards, making phone calls, reaching out far and wide to do our part to encourage eligible voters first to register and then to actually vote. What was just a civic duty once, a quick in and out to a polling place at a nearby school or a garage, has become an ugly trillion-dollar battleground, clogging our email boxes daily with pleas for donations, further splintering families and friendships, and our fragile democracy. And now it's the 11th hour. Have you ever wondered why certain messages falter while others deliver compelling results? What words are more likely to get the register voters that we're trying so hard to reach to feel their votes will count, to make a difference in the issues they care about? What's enough to inspire them to cast their votes up and down ballots? And even if turning out means braving long drives, much longer lines, challenging barriers, and even efforts to disqualify them. Anat Shenker-Osorio has built a global reputation for finding those magic words. She's helped those lucky enough to experience her wisdom learn to engage the base, persuade the middle, and send naysayers packing. Founder and principal of ASO Communications, Anat's also the host of the Words to Win by podcast. It's a treasure trove of real-world narrative shifts that led to real-world successes. Anat's original messaging research approach has led to profiles in the Washington Post, the Atlantic, the Boston Globe, and beyond, and many electoral and issue victories worldwide. She's also the author of Don't Buy It, The Trouble with Talking Nonsense About the Economy. Together, we're going to behind the scenes as Anat reveals the words, tactics, and strategies it takes to take on entrenched interests, defy expectations, and help ordinary people like us get extraordinary results. I first got to know Anat decades ago now, when I ran ProMedia. Instead of trying to promote the 4-day work week back in the late 1980s, for example, ProMedia talked about the familiar and popular 3-day weekend that every working person scanned their calendars for back then. Same thing, of course, just different words, right? So Anat and I were instant soulmates, and I've admired her work from afar ever since. And now I'm honored to welcome to our Ashby Village Fall Arts and Culture Lectures series, co-sponsored by Ashby Village's Elder Action Interest Group, the wisest, most effective wordsmith I know, Anat Shenker-Osorio.
Oh my goodness, how am I supposed to actually talk after that? That was too generous an introduction, but I promised I would say a thing, so I guess I'm gonna have to say a thing. I'm gonna call up my slides so we can make the magic happen. While I'm doing that, I can take the moment to just thank you all for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you for spending, as was already said, some of your Sunday, your beautiful sunny Sunday. I am an Oaklander, so we are neighbors. So I'm definitely in this with you. I'm going to take us on a whirlwind tour of some principles of persuasion and mobilization intended for folks in a nonprofit space like you all. And then we will open it up for questions. So I've been at this a while, and where it has left me doing both analytic research and empirical testing of all sorts and varieties, mostly in the US, but also abroad, is a set of principles. And that's what I'm going to punch down the list of with you all. If you forget everything else that I say today and you're only left with one thing, or if you are in a situation in which you have the shortest possible of sound bites and you've only got 5 seconds, you don't even get 30, the one thing to remember is say what you're for, say what you're for, say what you're for. I often like to joke that if the left had written the story of David, it would be a biography of Goliath, because we like to talk about our opposition all of the time. In fact, I sometimes say if I had to encapsulate progressive messaging in 3 sentences, it would be, boy, have I got a problem for you. This is the Titanic. Would you like to buy a ticket? And we're the losing team. We lost recently. Would you like to join us? It turns out most people are not seeking a ticket to the Titanic. They've got 99 problems and they don't want a new one from us, and they don't want to join the losing team. Even in the most contentious of issues, I recognize it can feel like there is no affirmative thing to say. What could I possibly be for here? All I can do is say, not that, stop that, end that. But I would encourage you to dig deep in your creativity and recognize there is always an affirmative message to send.
Clearly, humanity is central to this, and that's something that everyone can get on board. Players are saying, I may not be the aggrieved group directly. I still see you as my brother, and I'm standing by you.
That was from 2020 work we did around, as you probably can guess, the BLM resurgence after the murder of George Floyd and in the heat of the 2020 election, which we tested across all sorts of metrics, and it performed phenomenally well, not just with our base, but also with persuadables. But all too often, we either engage in standard negation, which I'm guessing you've heard of. It's when we say immigrants are not taking our jobs, Muslims are not terrorists, trans affirming care is not child abuse, and therefore unwittingly actually reinforce our opposition, or more subtly, but also just as problematically, we are a no and a don't and a stop and a can't. So we frequently frame what it is we are seeking in a negative demand. Stop this, don't have that, abolish that. And what happens when we make negative demands is we actually reaffirm our opposition storyline, and even worse, we reaffirm cynicism. And what testing shows us over and over again is that in many cases, our opposition is not the opposition, it's actually cynicism. It's not that people don't believe that our ideas are correct, it's that they do not believe that they are possible. So why bother even trying? Everything is so screwed up, it's never going to change anyway, so I might as well just stay at home and watch the world end in high definition. Again, I recognize it can feel like there is no affirmative demand to make in a lot of the horrible situations we confront, but I would challenge you that there always is.
You are my sunshine, my only sunshine.
Tú me alegras, es así.
You never know, dear, how much I love you.
Nunca quitas mi cielo de mí.
The other night, dear, as I lay sleeping,
I dreamt I held you in my arms.
Al despertarme no te tenía, escondí mi cabeza y lloré.
please don't take my sunshine away.
Tested it many times. End deportation, stop family separation, abolish this, don't have that. Does not hold up in comparison to we can create a fair immigration process, as we were saying at the end of that ad. This was part of the campaign push to stop what the Trump administration was doing that I'm guessing you know all too well in terms of family separation and really horrifying detention. But as you can see, none of the images depicted in it are of harms and horrors, and that is intentional. Because part and parcel of saying what we are for is recognizing that we need to evoke empathy and not sympathy. I'm going to explain this via an example from work that we did in Australia. This was 2013, before we did the research. Classic negation. Seeking asylum is not illegal. Learn the facts and show your support today, because clearly the reason why the government of Australia was shunting people to offshore prisons for decades and decades and decades is because they didn't know the facts. That is not true. That is some sarcasm for you on a Sunday. To 2015, right before we did the research, a classic harms and horrors message. This is where the U.S. immigrant rights movement, I would argue, often is today. This child depicted behind bars, the only developed country in the world that locks up children seeking asylum. Happy to say Australia no longer in that position. U.S. still sadly is. To where we shifted after the research. I want to be a human rights lawyer. There are people on this planet you can help by doing simple things. And here, Amir, depicted at the time of this photo, was actually in a prison camp. I'm happy to say that that is no longer the case, because not only was the human rights sector in Australia successful at winning this Bring Them Here campaign, they also won 3 other campaigns over the course of a single year and shifted public opinion on people seeking asylum, a term I use deliberately, 20 points. So they won Bring Them Here, they won Let Them Stay, they won Kids Off Nauru, and they won the Medevac bill. And you can hear in that hashtag, Bring Them Here, an affirmative demand. Not end this, not stop that, but actually saying what they are for. We need to make sure that we are not forcing people to perform their pain for us as a condition of accepting their humanity. When we profile people just in terms of harms and horrors, we are still engaged in otherizing them. At best, we are getting our audiences to feel sorry for those people, whether those be people who are affected by homelessness, people who are struggling with some sort of addiction, people who can't make ends meet, people of a different race, people of a different background. If you are just depicting people in their worst and most horrifying moments, what you're doing is you're reinforcing this idea of their own powerlessness, rather than create an overlap of brand identity between your target audience, the people that you seek to move, and the people on whose behalf and with whom you are conducting the messaging. I want to be clear that in the messaging work that I do, it is always participatory, and a big part of the reason that I avoid harms and horrors messaging is because the affected communities have asked me and asked many of us not to. This is simply an explanation of that idea that the way that we move folks is by creating what I just described as that overlap of shared identity, rather than focusing in on what it is that makes us different. So here is an illustration of doing just that on the issue of abortion. This is a campaign that we have been part of running since the Alito leak.
Someone you love may struggle with a pregnancy.
Thank you.
A pregnancy they longed for that slipped away. Someone they were counting down the days to meet that couldn't survive. A pregnancy that would endanger providing for the children they already have. A pregnancy they were too sick to carry. That they never planned to have. That wasn't right for them. That comes too soon after giving birth. That would mean starting over. Someone you love might need an abortion someday. You can help ensure that when the day comes, they can get the care they need.
I support you.
So what's going on in this ad, in contrast to a pretty common approach, which is talk about people's previous abortions, is actually to take the viewer and force them to confront their own potential loss aversion and the potential that they will one day be in this situation, even if not directly happening to them, happening to someone inside of their network, by projecting into a future in which someone you love is going to be in this situation and what is going to occur then. Again, the idea being empathy, not sympathy. This approach is rooted in a lot of what we learned from the work that we did in Ireland to repeal the referendum. So say what you're for. Order matters. We find that the exact same message tested, the same 3 sentences flipped around, actually alter how people feel and how persuasive something is. So I'm going to show you an ad from 2020. So this is a long done, this election. And this is in the proper order. I'll show it to you and then I'll describe that order. So that is not that different to the dozens and dozens, even hundreds of COVID-related ads that we saw in the previous cycle. But rather than begin in with, here is how screwed up this situation is, here is everything that the politicians in power have done wrong, this is what's not okay, it starts instead by showing people who are doing the right thing, people who are caring for each other, people who are being helpful and community, right? So it begins with a shared value and then it introduces with the record scratch the villain second, not first. So the opening salvo is not, boy, if I got a problem for you. We do introduce the problem, but we do that second, not first. And then it closes with the vision of what it is we seek. So the order here is values, villain, vision. Hopefully an easy thing to remember. Here's another example of drawing that contrast between who we are, what we seek, what we desire, and what is in our way.
Our money could go here, or it could go here. Our money could go here, or it could go here. Just imagine where our money could go if corporations paid what they owe instead of taking it for themselves. Tell your state representatives to demand corporations pay what they owe.
This is from a project and testing that we did around, probably you can guess, but raising revenue and actually raising taxes at the state level. Sell the brownie, not the recipe. So this box, obviously on the front of this box, it's a picture of a brownie. But I think we've all been around long enough, and at least at some point in our youth, we have purchased this box. And so we know that inside of it, there is in fact, sadly, no brownie. Inside of this box is a bag of powder, and on the back is a set of instructions that one must follow in order to turn said powder into said brownie. We need to sell the brownie and not the recipe. When we talk about our policies, that is recipe. And what we find in testing is that when we ask people nationally, for example, do you support paid family leave? The majority of Americans do. But when we say instead, do you think people should be there the first time their newborn smiles? Way more people support that. When we say, do you think that we should raise wages? The majority support that. But when we say, do you think everyone should be paid enough to put food on the table? More people support that. What you want to talk about is the outcome of your policy rather than the name of the policy itself. Here's an example again from that taxation study that I described.
Is your town suffering from a lack of progress? Are projects and social services all backed up? It's time to try revenue. With annual doses of revenue, communities can thrive in no time. Side effects may include a profound sense of justice, decreased corporate money hoarding, billionaire sad face, and jobs. Ask your state representatives if revenue is right for your community, because it is, and corporations need to pay what they owe.
Obviously a joke on a pharma ad. It is very, very helpful in ads to do things that are novel. It's hard to get people to watch political ads. Next principle, politics isn't solitaire. Unfortunately, we do not live in a world in which our voters only hear from us. That would be very nice. What they hear is the unrelenting race baiting, scapegoating, gender bashing, fear mongering of the other side, as I'm sure you are very familiar. You may even know this in intimate detail. Another Bay Area-ite, Professor Ian Haney-Lopez, who is at the law school at Cal, this, credit to him, is his framework. This comes from a project that we co-led together alongside Heather McGee called The Race Class Narrative. And basically, it builds upon Ian's work that he laid out in the book Dogmas of Politics, that this is the right-wing narrative. So it is stoke, exacerbate, double down on racial fears. Those fears can be existential. They're not coming in the right way. They don't believe in our way of life, law and order. In some states, like my home state of Wisconsin, it can be simple as enough as just saying Milwaukee. Milwaukee, of course, when you're talking to people upstate, is just code for Black people, same as Detroit is in Michigan. Those fears can be economic. The magical immigrant who is both taking our jobs and not working. Funny that. And while the effect of those fears is to create enmity against Black people, against brown people, against transgender people, against new immigrants, against the scapegoat du jour, its core purpose, it's important to understand, is to create a disgust with and a distrust of government itself. In essence, to undermine the notion that there can be an us. We're meant to understand that there cannot be an us because there's a them. A them that just doesn't want to work and just wants to sit there and get handouts. A them that just doesn't teach their children the right thing. A them that just doesn't want to contribute to our communities. And because there's a them, we're meant to understand we cannot have basic things like a functional higher educational system that is actually affordable for all people, or universal health care, or nationalized paid family leave, and on and on and on. We cannot have a collective system because we're meant to understand that we are not a collective. We are hardworking good people who are coded as white and profligate bad people who are exploiting the system who are coded as Black and brown. That breeds economic resentment. That cycle goes on and on and on. They have been at this a very long time. Divide and conquer. It is probably the oldest trick in the political book, and it works not just within the United States, but as I'm sure you're all too aware, around the world. Where this has left the left for a very long time, again, not just here, but also abroad, is in a very tired debate where one group says, the way the left lost its way is we stopped talking about bread and butter issues, wages, working conditions, healthcare, and if we would just talk about economic things and not go down that rabbit hole of what we've been told to call identity politics, which of course is opposition framing, then we could recapture everyone because financial concerns know no kind of boundary, right? They impact most people. And then we have a group of people who remind us that the core of a progressive base are people of color, certainly in a state like our own and many others. And if we are not attending to issues that a functional country would call human rights, like being able to actually make it through your community without being profiled by police, or being able to adjust to some sort of citizenship status if you've been here forever and ever, and I could go on, then our base is left cold. And as we all know, we have a mobilization problem, right? The largest share of the potential electorate in the United States are people who do not vote. Then we have folks who tell us we need to do both. And oftentimes where that leaves us is in a message I call the dependent clause message. It sounds like this. It's getting harder and harder to make ends meet, comma, and that affects African Americans in particular. Or college is increasingly out of reach, comma, and Latinos struggle with that. So it's where we name an economic issue, we remember someone told us you're supposed to talk about race, or you're supposed to talk about gender, you're supposed to talk about gender identity, whatever, and so we stick it over there in a dependent clause. What happens with that message is that it does not work. And when it doesn't work, people then say, oh, it doesn't work to talk about race. It's not that it doesn't work to talk about race, it's that it does not work to stick it on at the end, and here's why. Number one, for people of color in our samples, it frequently sounds like an afterthought because it is an afterthought. For too many white people in our samples, it sounds like a non sequitur. You were just talking about the cost of college. Now you're talking about Latinos. What? And third, what we know over and again is that if we name a disparity without providing an origin story for it, people fill in that story themselves with whatever is top of mind. So when we tell folks, for example, women are vastly underrepresented in Congress, and that's all we say, many of them conclude, well, women don't want to run. They're not ambitious. When they run, they don't win. When we tell people, we know from Jennifer Richeson's work, scholar at Yale, that African-American men are 3 times as likely to be incarcerated as white men. And then we ask people of different races in a sample for their policy preference, they favor harsher sentencing. When you simply present a factual disparity, people will go to the causal argument that is most top of mind. And in our society, that is one either of individuals having screwed up or some kind of defect of that group. And so what we have come to through many, many years, we began this research in 2017. We've done it many, many times over. We have implemented it in multiple states, including Midwestern battlegrounds in the 2020 election and in Minnesota in 2018 for the midterms there, is a narrative that weaves together race and class and makes them inseparable, not a dependent clause. These are the core elements of that race-class narrative. And this is how the narrative works sequentially. As previously, it is still values, villains, vision. It just has a little bit more meat on those bones. So again, it opens with a shared value that either names, if it's just words, or shows, if you're doing ads with images, explicit race, gender, class, whatever the axis of division that the opposition is exploiting. It then names the villain second and does so by highlighting how they are dividing us from each other, or shaming and blaming XYZ group, or trying to make us fear one another. Then it emphasizes unity and a collective action to achieve victory. Again, that is that abating cynicism step that is all important. And it connects joining together across differences to a desired outcome, whatever that brownie is. So here is an example of doing that in a message that we tested with NEA, which is one of the 2 big teachers unions, around, this is still from the taxes. This was the revenue research. So if you're unfamiliar with this methodology, people are instructed to dial up when they feel warmly and in agreement with the message, to dial down when they disagree. You will see them doing that in colors that correspond to the group they are. Blue for our base, folks who agree with us on these issues. Red for the opposition, folks who don't. Green for persuadables, the bulk of the sample. Usually in most testing, it's around 50% of people who are of mixed minds. They believe some of what we say, some of the opposition, and then a convenience sample of activists that is separate from the general population sample. These are folks who actually work in economic and racial justice, because if your words don't spread, they don't work. And if the activists won't use your message, how's anybody going to hear it? And it goes like this.
No matter our background, faith, or color, most of us work hard for our families. But as our work has made America prosper, a greedy few have rigged the rules to redirect resources from our communities to their country clubs, from our classrooms to their ballrooms, and from our public parks to their private jets. Now they stir fears based on what we look like or where we come from, hoping we will blame everyday people for the hardships these wealthy few create, so we don't join together to demand our shared resources deliver the programs, schools, and supports all of our families need. Together, we can demand our lawmakers rewrite the rules so nothing stands in the way of us providing a great life for our families.
Here's an ad example. I was jumping the gun from the work with the NEA, making a case for quality public education in the face of the anti-CRT attacks that I'm guessing you've seen or heard about at some point.
Things have changed since the 1950s, but some things haven't changed enough. Don't let anyone take us back there. Let's make a better future. Demand accurate, honest, fully funded education for our children.
And then finally, a more classic race class narrative. See if you can challenge yourself to pick out when it does the shared value, when it does the villain, and describing the villain as engaging in deliberate division, and then the closing vision. This is from a 2020 ad that we aired across Midwestern battlegrounds, and we tested both in RCT and then also in the field.
We want our communities to be healthy and vibrant. And so we march together
to demand justice.
While a handful of politicians try to make us fear each other,
we're onto them, and we count on us.
And so we turn up.
And we turn out as voters.
To make this a place where liberty and justice are for all.
For all.
For all.
Para todos.
Vote.
All right, if your words don't spread, they don't work. So we need to remember that a message is like a baton that needs to be passed from person to person to person. And if it gets dropped anywhere along the way, it does not reach them, and it can, by definition, not persuade them. So we need to ensure that we are activating our choir. I am sure you have heard, oh, you're just preaching to the choir. Well, I would urge you to remember that the choir is where the trouble starts. And if the choir is not singing in harmony, then there is no way that the congregation is hearing the joyful noise and going out and converting new adherents. Hopefully I'm getting this analogy right. I'm a Jew. In addition to activating that choir to sing in harmony, of course, there is not enough of our base to win. We also have to get a whole lot of the middle. We have had a fundamental and dangerous misunderstanding of the way that folks in the middle come to political judgments. We have been taught that they are moderates or they are centrists. In fact, the data do not back up that assertion. A far better way to think of these people is as conflicted. I call them the good point people because they are like this. Good point, but also good point, but yeah, good point. Meaning what they hear repeated most frequently becomes common sense and the way the world works. That is all the more reason why we need our base repeating, because these people are incredibly prone to what we call social proof, i.e. being moved by what they think people like them believe. So we need to toggle them into the most progressive understanding they can have of our issue and hold them there. And then we need to recognize that there are some people who cannot, shall not, will never agree with us. I want to be clear that in all of the testing we do, that is not the Republicans in the sample. In a nationally representative sample, around 40% are Republicans. And we are talking about marginalizing our opposition, especially with respect to issues. We are generally talking about anywhere between 15 and 18%, maybe in a really, really difficult issue, 20% of respondents. These are people who will never agree with us on the topic at hand. And so we need to ask ourselves, if these people like what we are saying, what are we saying? It is incredibly difficult to break a signal through the noise. So in these projects, even after we do boatloads of in-channel testing, whether that be sequential surveys, randomized controlled trials, ad tests, message tests, slogan tests, all of the above, we still have to do an inordinate amount of work actually implementing that. And so this is just a quick example from the family of brands that we created in 2020 across our Midwestern states. What this did was take, for example, in Wisconsin, All in Wisconsin was our brand. It was a brand and a coalition that encompassed everyone from the Dairy Farmers Union to the Milwaukee-based Block and Lit. I'm going to shock you by telling you that the Dairy Farmers Union in Wisconsin is pretty white. And that group and Milwaukee-based Black organizers were able, within a coalition, to agree to use shared messaging under this common branding. In Pennsylvania, it was We Go Together. In Michigan, it was We Make Michigan. This is what helps allow a signal to break through the noise. If people are out knocking on doors and the teachers are knocking on All in Wisconsin shirts and the dairy farmers are knocking on All in Wisconsin shirts and folks from Lit are knocking, then what is getting through is the actual message as opposed to the organizational affiliation. This is an example from Minnesota. Obviously, sure you know that Minnesota is in a tough spot, perhaps not as tough as the traditional battlegrounds that we're used to hearing about, but of course, in the wake of George Floyd and the Chauvin trial and everything that was going on there, top of mind, people asking about policing. And so this is how the Minnesota Coalition dealt with this. They put out this messaging to fund our lives, an affirmative demand. These are examples from various other places. On the left, Ohio, top right, Wisconsin, bottom, Michigan, showcasing the respective brands from the states. This is newer research that we have done. All of these resources are available on the ASO site. We are committed to open source. Everything that we make is non-proprietary, it just goes there. So there are messaging guides on everything under the sun. This is newer research to create a race, class, gender narrative to fold in and understand and be able to beat back the attacks that are happening on the basis of gender identity all around the country. This freedom from boxes message, this is just an example from testing where folks were exposed both to a right-wing greatest hits of terrible, horrible, race baiting, anti-trans messaging, and then exposed to a freedom from boxes message. It increased both support for the kinds of candidates that we would want, and it increased support for teaching critical race theory in schools. Yes, I know we do not teach CRT in K-12. The reason that we ask that question that way on a survey is to hold ourselves to a really high standard. If we can move people on that question because that's what they're hearing from the opposition, then we know that the message is working. This is an example, and I could do lots of these, of real world application. On the left, this was from a really, really difficult school board race in my home state of Wisconsin that Fox News decided to sort of put in high relief. And say, you know, they're teaching all sorts of terrible, they're teaching kindergartners about sodomy or whatever they were saying. And this is the school board president, who I'm happy to say won his reelection campaign, saying whether the school board continues to be a vital source of building up our community where students feel safe and welcome, whether it's a place where students are put in separate boxes. This is our freedom from boxes messaging, not given services and opportunities that every student deserves. And people need to know these tactics, are being used to try to make them afraid, to try to tear the fabric of our schools, to try to drive votes and control through fear rather than democracy. There is that deliberate division call out and ascribing motivation to why they're doing it. On the right-hand side, this is the Long Island hometown of one of my colleagues, a 98% white community where this school board member won in the face of really, really, really ugly CRT and anti-trans attacks. Lots more examples I could show you. So I'm going to leave off with some principles of getting out the vote or mobilization. Big kudos and credit to my frequent partners, Frameshift. They also did some of the RCT testing that I already referenced before. So the first thing is identity engenders action. I will say this was a long held sort of truism in GOTV testing. There has since been a study, I can't remember out of where because there's only so much that fits in my brain, that purportedly debunks this. What I will say about it, maybe it doesn't hold in sort of cold communication, by which I mean letters. But in warm communication, meaning either phone or face, if you can get someone to say, I will be a voter, if you can get them to claim that identity, then they are more likely to actually go and take the action. Whether or not sending them a postcard that says be a voter versus sending them a postcard that says vote, one does more than the other, that I'm not prepared to say. But if you can get somebody to actually say, I will be a voter, it's more likely they will actually take the action. Social proof, I talked about this earlier. We sometimes think that we can get people to vote by creating a sense of urgency around this idea that it's going to be a really low turnout election. You know, young people really don't vote in midterms. Latino participation is really down. Basically, whatever category you're in doesn't really vote. That actually demobilizes. People do the thing they think people like them do. We haven't really moved that far on from middle school as people, it turns out. And so what you want to do is actually the opposite of what I just said. You want to make it seem like your kind of a person does this thing. That is social proof. Social pressure, still the gold standard in mail. This is when a mailer goes to your house that says, who you vote for is private. Whether or not you vote is a matter of public record. Yes, this big brother seeming thing does in fact make a measurable difference at the margins. And politics, of course, is a game of millimeters, not even inches. There are ways to do social pressure that are less sort of creepy. These are some examples from some memes that we created and tested. Again, this idea that people can know whether or not you voted. So here's an example of an ad that avails itself of that identity thing, and I'll say a little bit more about what it does. Here, of course, we have that be a voter ending, but what's going on in this ad is a series of pro-social identities. One category of people we know from the qualitative research that we did previous to this quantitative is there's kind of two classes of reluctant voters. One of them, the one that this ad targets, we call the peace seekers. These are people who are very engaged in their communities, but they consider politics to be a realm of fighting, nastiness, bitterness, yuck. I want no part of that. These are folks who volunteer, they participate in church, they're engaged in other ways, and they really don't see politics as a way of forward movement. These are also people who tell us, I'm worried about making a mistake. it all seems very complicated. I don't know all the candidates. I don't know all the issues. And so they feel like they're not equipped to vote. So what's going on in this ad is that we are targeting those peace seekers by making them feel more positive about the identities that they already have. So we say, you are a leader, but we don't show a CEO in front of 5,000 people. We show somebody leading a group of kids. So it feels manageable to them, and we take them through those pro-social identities to the last one that we want them to hold, which is a voter. And then lastly, this is brand new research around mobilization. Again, abating cynicism. So in this most recent round, folks are in different treatment tracks. People in the control track get no ad at all. And the people in this track, they got 2 ads, this one and the next one. I will show you both of them and explain what they do. These proved really, really effective at mobilization.
60 years ago, this seemed impossible. 15 years ago, this seemed impossible. 10 years ago, this seemed impossible. We decide what's possible. Be a voter.
So they saw that, and they saw this in a randomized order.
We've got a mission coming up soon, and we need everyone, everywhere to join the team. I'm talking your neighbor, your uncle, that woman at work that never laughs at your jokes. The mission? To make life better for you and your family. How do we pull it off? By getting every courageous American to vote. Let's get the gang back together, because taking action together is how we get things done.
So what those 2 ads do is essentially what I call we did, we can, we will. They create a sense that we can actually have positive change, but they don't just make that assertion out of nowhere. They actually track that assertion back to a previous achievement, making it seem more credible. And so with that, I will stop and have some questions.
Thank you very much for this very important and very interesting presentation. We have a few questions, not too many actually for you, and let's just start. So the first one is if there is a recording of this presentation. Yeah, there will be a recording of this presentation. It will be on the Ashby Village YouTube channel. Can be seen there, I'm sure, starting tomorrow. And then the next question we have here is, we are less than a month away from the midterm election. Where does timing figure into the messaging? How far in advance do you have to start the ball rolling?
It's a great question. So there is definitely something that we call persuasion windows that we find in testing, where the exact same ad, if we test it in this given moment versus in this other moment, we will see really different size of movement. So for example, an ad that was about universal health care in February of 2020 versus at the end of March, which of course is, I'm guessing you remember when the lockdown happened, that exact same ad could engender a very, very different size of response. So when we look at persuasion around the midterm elections, we are reaching the place where people's opinions and ideas are pretty baked in. There is not a lot of juice left in the squeeze, if you will, for 2 reasons. The first, people more or less are now finally tuned in and paying attention, and so they've started to sort of calcify their assessments of the candidates, and they have some sort of like identity attachment to, this is my person and this is who I'm going with. And then the other thing is that in our battleground states, people are saturated with political ads to a degree that is unfathomable. I was told that in Wisconsin, for example, people are seeing, or they are being served 11 political ads an hour. So what happens when that is going on is that they are primed to already reject before they hear it, right? They're like, oh, that's a political ad. No, thank you. I don't care what it says. I already know I don't want that. So persuasion is much, much, much more effective earlier on. And in particular, I would say around an election between, let's say, May and September. That's like a strong persuasion window. It's really hard before that because people are like, election, what are you even talking about? I have no idea. And after that, like I said, people sort of bake in. Mobilization, now, getting people out. You would be shocked by the number of people who are still like, oh, there's election in November. That's the majority of people are not paying attention.
Okay, that's sad. Any additional research or guidance for progressive religious messaging regarding abortion and LGBTQIA rights?
Yeah, so I'm trying to interpolate what that could mean, progressive religious messaging. So I'm guessing what you mean. Sorry, I'm guessing. Messaging to people who are already progressive and religious. The reason why I'm struggling is because it would seem like those folks are already in your camp. Or do you mean, sorry, can the person who wrote that clarify a little bit more who you mean? Like who are you trying to move? And I think I know toward what. You're trying to move them toward greater support for access to abortion and LGBTQIA rights.
She just
clarify.
Broader public persuadables.
Okay, thank you. So what I would say is that you have a few options. One of them, if you're coming like from the faith perspective, that is sort of who you are, who your organization is as a messenger, what you can do is what we call acknowledge and redirect. And so what that would sound like is, and I'm making this message up on the spot, so you need to copy edit it, but I would say, no matter what we look like or what faith we practice, I think most of us believe that our personal and private decisions are between us and whatever God we see fit to worship. As a person of faith, I know that I have my own views and my own feelings about abortion. But that doesn't mean that it is my place to decide for other people the choices that they're going to make. So you acknowledge your own feelings, you acknowledge your own ambivalence, you acknowledge, if you have it, you acknowledge the role that faith plays in there for you, and then you do a but to redirect to say, but that doesn't mean we make sort of sweeping decisions for all people on the basis of our own personal convictions. Again, that is if you're coming from a faith perspective on the question.
How did you develop the science behind all this?
Yeah. Oh, somebody is having trouble with the visuals. I don't know what to say about that. Folks were seeing the slides change, right? Yeah, okay. Don't know what to say about that. That might be an individual user problem. So how did I develop it? What's the short answer of that? I don't even know where to begin. So some of it, the analytic pieces, which often happen at the beginnings of projects, involve cataloging the status quo ways that people argue. So that involves looking really closely at language messaging from advocacy, from opposition, from pop culture, from social media to understand, oh, this is the range of ways that people could understand immigration, or this is the range of ways that people could understand taxes. These are the metaphors that we're using to make different arguments. This is how the opposition argues about it. So that I often liken to the "you are here" dot on a map, and that is purely analytical. It's applying language analysis to existing discourse. Then we also want to know the destination. And so frequently in our projects, what we will do is elicitation interviews with advocates where we pull out of people, what do you wish people believed? How do you wish that they reasoned? What do you wish that they thought about XYZ issue? And then we create a series of hypotheses, some of them super simple, like it seems like saying people seeking asylum versus asylum seekers is going to be better, to more complex ideas like, It seems like the age-old nation of immigrants argument about immigration is really not working because it actually reinforces nationalism. And it turns out that nationalism is not our friend, especially when we're trying to get people to care about people who aren't originally from our nation. And so instead, what would we say? So we sort of say, this message doesn't seem to be working. This one seems like it would be better. And then we do quantitative testing, and we do it in all sorts of ways. You saw, for example, a dial test, which is a survey instrument where people are measuring moment-to-moment responses. You saw some ads that we had tested through randomized control trial. That's done in the same way that drug trials are done, where you have one group that gets a placebo ad that's not about politics, and then you have different groupings of pretty big size so that we have statistical significance, who get one kind of a treatment ad. And then we are measuring things like in electoral ads, we're measuring, did it move people on the horse race, on a generic ballot? Did it move people on support for one party or another? Did it move people's self-reported desire to vote? And then we also conduct field-based experiments where we will, for example, send 100,000 postcards with this kind of wording out and 100,000 postcards with that kind of wording out. And then we're no longer relying on self-reporting. We are actually, after the election, looking at the voter file and saying, oh gosh, the people who got postcard B had this much more turnout. So many different ways.
What do you suggest as a good approach when the opponent candidate uses misinformation and lies? Do we call them out, or is there some positive way to address this?
Yeah, so it's pretty much the same formula with the values, villain, and vision. You want 2 times as much truth to their lie. So let's say someone has said, I'm going to pick a random one, you know, the COVID vaccine makes you radioactive, or the COVID vaccine, I can't even remember the number of silly things that one has said about the COVID vaccine. So I'll just take that one. So rather than negating, the COVID vaccine does not make you radioactive, that's ridiculous, which is actually a repetition of that silliness. What you say is first what you are for. So you say, over an incredible amount of research and testing, and more vitally, actual application in the real world in hundreds and millions of people, we have seen that COVID vaccines are safe and effective. So you say what is true, always say what is true. Then you call out the other side without repeating their lie. You say, but today a handful of people want to scare us about these proven approaches because they hope to sow chaos and breed division so that we cannot heal our communities and get over this pandemic. So you call out what it is they're doing, spread false claims, make lies, make disproven assertions, etc., but you don't repeat the assertion. And then you seal the deal by saying, by coming together and ensuring that all of us have a shot, at great health, we can move past this pandemic and see our communities safe, well, and whole. And then, so you tell people what you need them to do. So that's the sandwich.
So the next question is actually a good one. How do you deal with the natural reluctance to take cold calls and reactive irritation? I think.
Yeah, so I would say 2 things about that. The first is when you have a list yourself, the way that you need to prepare yourself for that happening is you need to remind yourself that in any list of 100 people, and I'm not up to date, so I'm making this number up because there's only so many numbers I can keep in my head at once. There's a very low rate in cold calling of the number of people who are going to take your call and actually have a conversation with you. Let's pretend, for argument's sake, it's 10%. That's an easy number. Let's say you have a list of 100 people. What you need to tell yourself as a canvasser is, I need to go find my 10 people. There are 10 people on this list who are going to talk to me. And my job is to find those 10 people from among the 90 people who are not going to talk to me. They are my buried little treasure. So when you encounter the majority of people who are not going to talk to you, rather than feel personal about it, which is very hard as a human being not to do, right? It doesn't feel good. You're like, oh, you weren't one of my people. I'm still on the treasure hunt. I did not, make it to the X marks the spot with the treasure. And so what that does is it makes it easier for you. So that's my first tip. And I know that feels like I'm not answering the question, but actually a lot of the issue is how we feel as the person making these phone calls rather than what's going on with the other side. Now, what is happening with the other side? With the other side, what I would say is that your best bet in any conversation is to begin by actually listening. And so what I mean by that is saying, hi, I'm Anat. I know you get a lot of these calls. I'm calling from Ashby Village. Nothing to sell. Got nothing to sell. I'm actually just here to have a conversation about what's going on. I know there's a lot going on and times are tough. What's top of mind for you? What are you thinking about or struggling with, or what's going on in your household, and let them tell you. And then you take what they tell you. If it's healthcare, if it's prices, if it's, my kid had this accident, or I can't get my kid into college, or I can't pay for it, if you can, and this depends on the flexibility of the call program you're doing. And so this may be way outside the bounds of what you're allowed on the script. So, notwithstanding those rules, you take that and you shift what you were going to say. So if they tell me something about jobs and wages and they're really struggling and, their husband can't get paid enough, I would say, oh my gosh, that is so rough. I so hear you. It seems to me like no matter what we look like or where we come from, most of us believe that people who work for a living ought to earn a living. I would start there. But if someone told me healthcare, we can't get healthcare, I would start my message by saying, yeah, that's terrible. I am so sorry that you're going through that struggle. It really feels like wherever we live, whatever our zip code or background, when someone we love is ill or injured, we want them to get the very best care without going bankrupt to do it. Like, you begin your opening value with what they've just said to you. And then you go into, but today a handful of politicians want to divide us, or but today these folks are blocking anything and everything our families need, so that you can be responsive to what they've just said.
Anat, there's one more question. I don't know, do you have the time to answer that? Or
yeah, I'll do one more and then I will run off.
Thank you. There's the persuasive message, the persuadable recipients. What can you say about the messenger, and what traits, style, even demographic make the messenger more effective?
Yeah, so what I would say is a couple of things. The first is authenticity. People can smell inauthenticity from many, many, many miles away. So, if you're not a religious person, don't make a religious argument. It's gonna show through. I mean, that's just a simple example. So be the person that you are and find a messenger that is authentic to the thing that you're trying to say. So for example, if we are trying to confront someone who has, let's say, been disgustingly, grossly unpatriotic in supporting the criminal conspiracy to overthrow the election, I'm sure we can't think of any people who have behaved in that way in our recent history who are right now running for office. Have a veteran do it, right? If we are talking about someone who has been sort of egregious and disgusting in terms of their handling of public health or healthcare, have a nurse do it. The other piece that I will say, it's generally considered to be, conventional wisdom that you want a match, an identity match in terms of race and age and so on, between your target audience and your messenger. There's a really, really interesting new meta-analysis by one of my friends with a giant team of academics, including some at Cal, it was MIT, Cal, Yale, collaboration, where they did a meta-analysis of 1,000 ads that have been that were tested over 2020, and what they found is actually you didn't need to do a match between the race of the messenger and the recipient, that people were as likely to be persuaded if the message was persuasive, regardless of the messenger. The one grouping, interestingly, that sort of had more feelings about what kind of messenger they were receiving were older white folks. They were sort of the outliers. Folks in the 65 plus white category, they were more likely to be moved by a messenger that was their own demographic, but everyone else was a mix and match.
Okay, I think that's it. Thank you so much, Anat. And yeah, I think I give it back to Rochelle now.
Well, thank you. I appreciate, Anat, the window into the kind of wisdom that has the potential to persuade and mobilize voters that our democracy needs next month and beyond. It truly takes a village to produce programs like the one that you've just experienced this afternoon. So first, I want to thank the members of the Ashby Village Arts and Culture Group, Sigrid Duisberg for your masterful job managing the Q&A, Irene Marcos, Rondi Saslow, our newest member, AV volunteer Deanne Stone, and Betty Webster for all that you've done to put today's program together and to make sure we reach our audience today and with our YouTube recording later this week. Thanks too to the members of the Elder Action Steering Committee of Ashby Village, to Joan Cole, Julie Freestone, Amy Gorman, Elaine Jackson, M.A. Morgan, and Roberta Pressman, who's stepped up so that Elder Action could co-sponsor today's presentation and all that entailed. So now that Anat has inspired us, we're going to be closing today's event earlier than usual to give each of you in our audience the time to take some concrete steps to add on Anat's wise words. Thanks to Ashby Village's Elder Action, in time to have an impact. Our research turned up 3 organizations, among many, that are compliant with our nonprofit 501c3 status, whose nonpartisan efforts we can as elders still join in on by the 3rd week of October to help move eligible voters to turn out to vote on or before November 8th. The first, Working America, has 3 million plus members, including over 50 members of the Capitol Hill Village. For 19 years, they've successfully helped mobilize voters, especially many who have not completed college. Their effective letter writing campaign offers us a clear template, and all you need to do to get to the folks at Working America so they can send it out the 3rd week of October is to add a paragraph about your personal experience with healthcare, affordable housing, or jobs. These 3 issues are the ones that Working America's careful research and outreach show moves regular voters in swing states to whom the Working America folks have been in close touch. It moves these folks to vote in next month's midterm election. So reach out to www.workingamerica.org, to our local contact there, Laura J. Fu, to join Working America's tried and true letter writing campaign and to get your instructions and your list today. Ashby Village Elder Action, for the second group, is a founding member, actually a founding partner of Third Act, the new national climate action group for us, elders, that was co-founded this year by New Yorker writer and climate leader Bill McKibben and long-term beloved Oakland elder activist Akaya Windwood. Both of them spoke to more than 500 of us at Ashby Village's January 9th Arts and Culture event. So our second suggestion, go to www.thirdact.org to reach our local contact from the Third Act San Francisco Bay Area Working Group, Maureen. And if you reach Maureen at thirdactsfbayarea@gmail.com, she will get you the next step in the Third Act Bay Area's Defending Democracy campaign. You're going to get their Get Out the Vote action with intergenerational climate action twist. And so the third event, thanks to help from the new Elder Action Steering Committee member, Amy Gorman, if you prefer writing and sending postcards, maybe even calling or texting to get the vote out, especially to reach out to Black and Brown voters in voter suppression states, just click on www.reclaimourvote.org. So now, dear audience, you know what you can do. Let's make Anat glad that she generously donated her time at the peak of this election cycle to Ashby Village. And let's show her and the world and ourselves just how, through our beloved village, ordinary elders can come together to do extraordinary things. And I'm sorry, maybe you didn't get to see me here because my computer is on the fritz again. But Jessica, if you could please help us exit Zoom so we can get started.
Thank you, Rochelle. Thank you, everyone. Yes, I will be ending the Zoom momentarily. I've placed a few of the links that Rochelle mentioned in the chat. If they are not links, please copy and paste them into your browser. Also, all of these links, plus the recording and information about donating and the next living room chat will be sent in a follow-up email in the next few days. So thank you all for coming. Thank you for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.